I'm Dave Shepherd, VP Technology at ClearPoint. I'm going to talk to you today about FinOps, a new approach to getting your cloud costs under control. My industry experience includes 12 years at Air New Zealand as General Manager of Software Engineering, Application Support and IT Operations in various roles, and also a year at Henry Schein One, a software products company specialising in dental practice management software who are migrating on-premise applications into the cloud. So before I talk about what FinOps is, I'd like to talk about why we need FinOps. So globally and locally, and probably at your company, you would have seen your spend on cloud computing growing at an increasing rate. And the reasons for this are numerous. There's lots of software that's being built as cloud native, i.e. it's being built straight for the cloud. And a lot of existing on-premise workloads are also being migrated into the cloud. Because cloud costs are so easy to consume, all you need is a credit card to get you started. A lot of organisations are having difficulty predicting their monthly spend because there are lots of small decisions that are being made that increase or decrease their cloud spend. And the looming recession that we keep hearing about is going to put a lot of pressure on companies' profits, and so all variable costs will be under the microscope, and that's going to include things like cloud costs. And if you're not careful, you're going to have the wrong people making decisions about cloud costs. The last thing you want is your finance team looking at the cost and deciding to cut the biggest ticket items. Another thing you don't want to have happen is your engineering teams are negotiating with your cloud provider to try and save money. If you're careful and you have a new approach, then cloud computing can save you a significant amount of money. But you have to know how, and that's where FinOps comes in. So what is FinOps? Here's a long definition. FinOps.org is a part of the FinOps Foundation, and they've defined cloud FinOps as an evolving cloud financial management discipline and cultural practice that enables organisations to get maximum business value by helping engineering, finance and business teams collaborate on data-driven spending. Now there's a lot there to unpack. There's some key words in that long definition. There's discipline, there's a cultural practice, there's maximising business value, there's multiple teams, engineering, finance and business teams, and there's collaboration, and there's data. You put all those things together in the right way in a cultural practice that's going to extend more than just tools, you're going to get a much better outcome for managing those cloud costs. So here's a framework. This is a complicated slide. There's a lot on there. I'm going to unpack the various parts of this slide. Credit to the FinOps Foundation, who I've borrowed this framework from, and I've run through their training, and I've taken some of the ideas from their work into this presentation today. So it's a credit to them for this framework. There are 6 principles of FinOps, which I'll talk through. There are 5 personas or groups or teams that need to be involved as stakeholders. And this is a maturity journey. So you need to learn how to crawl and then walk and then run. And like other maturity journeys, DevOps, Agile, these things happen in phases. And so there's a cycle that you run through repeatedly to build up your maturity. And at the bottom, there are 6 domains or activities. These are the actual things that you will do to improve your maturity and start working in this way. So I'm going to unpack the parts of this diagram over the rest of the presentation. The 6 FinOps principles. Firstly, and most importantly, and it seems obvious, that teams need to communicate. And by that I mean teams need to attend each other's meetings. And the teams that I'm talking about are those personas. But the most important 2 teams that need to communicate and collaborate are the finance team and the engineering team. For the finance team, they need to learn how modern software development happens. They need to work at the speed and the granularity of the software team. Most software teams these days working in an agile manner will meet daily, have a daily stand-up. And at these meetings, they'll be making small decisions about cloud infrastructure, about development environments, about how big the testing environment should be, when the next release is going to happen, when they need a user acceptance test environment, whether the production environment needs to scale for the next promotion. All of those decisions happen almost in real time within that team on a daily basis. The finance team need to be there at those meetings and to collaborate. And for the development teams, they need to add a new metric to their software efficiency. They need to add cost. It's not going to be enough in this modern world to measure your software architecture by its performance or its scalability or your ability to deploy it automatically. or the coolness of the architecture. The second principle is that everyone needs to take ownership for their cloud usage. And by everyone, I mean those two teams primarily, but also your business stakeholders, your business owners, all the way up to your execs. And that means that people need to have information, which I'll talk about in a minute. You need a centralized team that drives these FinOps practices. And by a centralized team, I don't mean form a brand new team. I've got a slide that talks about who's in this team and how it operates. But you need a team that are going to drive this practice throughout your organization. Reporting and data. This needs to be timely and accessible. And ideally, you want to shift this information as far left as possible. And when I say left, I mean left in the timeline. You might be working on monthly reports from your cloud provider, which means that the action you take on that report, you'll only see the result of that action in the next month's report. What we want to do is to move that information down to weekly, daily, even hourly, or real time, and have that information available to the teams that are configuring the cloud infrastructure. The teams that are spending the cloud cost need to know the impact on the bill at the end of the month. And those decisions need to be based around business value, not on cost. So our business stakeholders, product owners, need to be familiar with how agile software is built and run. They should be championing automated testing, automated build pipelines, scaling in production automatically. They should be able to measure their business unit. Is it transactions? Is it cost of sale? Is it a deal done? And the cloud infrastructure cost alongside the labor costs of building that. For example, if you're running a big promotion and you expect your sales volume to triple or quadruple over a period of time, you would expect your cloud costs to go up for that period of time. And if you know you're going into a lull over the Christmas break or over the winter period, you would expect, and you should ask, why your cloud costs can't scale back down during that period of time. So your cost of cloud per business unit should be able to stay roughly the same, or at least scale in the same direction. And the last principle is that cloud obviously comes with a variable cost model, and you need to leverage that hard. But there are some downsides to that. Cloud also lets you reserve infrastructure, reserve capacity in the way that you might have gone out and purchased hardware. And you can sign up for cloud capacity for a number of years and save a substantial amount of money. But you have to know what it is you're signing up for. And you don't get to understand that unless you follow the rest of the principles and bring that information into the teams that are making those decisions. So let's talk through the personas. Who's involved in that FinOps team? So these were the 5 that were listed there, and you can see that a few of them have an and in there. And depending on the scale of your organization, you might have separate teams, for example, that look after finance and procurement. In a small company, it might be a single person that does both of these roles. Same with engineering and operations. You might have separate engineering and operations teams, or you might have a single team that do DevOps. So depending on the size of your organization, these personas might be separate teams and therefore a separate person or representative, or they might be a single person. So let's talk through these. Your FinOps practitioners, these are your champions, your cheerleaders. They're the ones who are going to drive this best practice through your organization, and they probably need some training. They might have come from a coaching background, they might have come from a change management background. They're good at facilitating and getting people on board with a change of direction and a new approach. You've got your executives. These are the people who should be owning and championing the strategy of using cloud, why we're going to the cloud, what the benefits are to the business of using cloud. It's key to have them on board through this journey. Your business and your product owners, their job is to quickly deliver new products and features with an accurate cost. So if you've brought them on the journey and they understand the cost of the cloud infrastructure, they can factor that in as a fully loaded cost of delivering their products, rather than assume that those things come for free or at someone else's expense. Your finance and procurement team, they have 2 roles to play here. First of all, they obviously need to be able to provide accurate budgets, forecasts, reports, but they also need to be able to drive the negotiations, maybe with some help from the execs, with those cloud providers. As I said earlier, you don't really want your engineering team negotiating with your cloud provider. That's the job of your procurement team. And they won't be able to do that unless they have enough information and enough trend analysis to what your spend is going to be. And obviously, your engineering and operations team play a key part. Their job is to quickly deliver high-quality, robust services or solutions alongside their BAU. So they're a key player in this. You won't be able to achieve an optimized FinOps organization and bring your cloud costs down without bringing your engineering and operations team along. So those are the key roles or personas, people who need to be part of that FinOps team. And as I mentioned, the way they work together is to centralize them. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are a separate team that sit in a separate part of the organization. A virtual team or even a committee will be a good way to start. But they need to be engaged. They need to understand each other's world. If you can co-locate them, even for a period of time, to learn each other's language, to sit beside each other and see what they do, that will be a big help. And the key horizontal arrows there, as I mentioned before, infrastructure changes and rate negotiations. These need to be formed by two different parts of that team and to be kept separate. As I said, this is a maturity journey. You need to crawl and then walk and then run. And there are three key phases in this cycle, which I'll talk through. The first phase around information. This is around getting visibility into your cloud spend. It's about allocating that cloud cost out to the business, understanding all of the components of that cloud bill and who's responsible for them. Sometimes you won't be able to find them. Sometimes people will just shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know why we've ended up with this. That's key information, but it's not something you can act on straight away. The next phase in that journey when you're crawling is to be able to look at the rates that you're paying and what you're paying for and think about whether there's anything that you can change. Can you change the size of some instances? Can you turn something off? Can you look at the type of instance you're using, fixed capacity versus flexible? What changes could you make? And then you make some changes, you see which way the cloud costs go. Did you get what you expected? Did you impact performance? And if you find that you've made a step in the right direction, you bake that in, you automate it, so you don't have to do it again. A good example is, let's say you find a bunch of cloud instances that are not being used over the weekend and not being used in the evening. And these are anonymous, you don't know what they are. You do some investigation, you realize this is your user acceptance test environment that's sitting there over the weekend or over the evenings idle. No one's using it. So you could turn that off. So you do that. You turn that off, no one complains. On a Monday morning, you start it back up again, or in the morning it starts up again. Everyone's happy. So you go, okay, we've just saved ourselves a few $1,000s every week by doing that. Over a few months, that adds up. So you want to automate that. So it's not someone's job to turn that off on a Friday night or turn it back on every morning. You can bake that into a schedule. You can automate that. So it happens by itself. In the same way, production instances can scale up and down with load. Again, you can automate those things so someone doesn't have to be sitting there making sure it happens. These are parts of the journey. I wouldn't start trying to do that on your first time through this. So let's talk about what that maturity journey looks like in terms of the practices, the actual things that you would do. These are the 6 domains of practice, and I've color-coded them to match the maturity cycle. So on your first run through, when you're crawling, these are some examples of the kinds of activities that you'll be doing. The first thing you'll want to do is to map that cloud spend to the business units. You might not be able to understand where they all go, but you should be able to unpack that with that FinOps team in the room and try and get people to say, this is mine, this is not mine. The second thing would be to look at that spend data on a regular basis, not every month. Make this a weekly meeting or even a daily meeting to say what changed yesterday. Third thing would be to track some of those trends and some of that variances. What happened between this week and last week? What happened over the weekend? Why is this month's bill bigger than last month's bill? What happened during the business cycle? Did we have any IT outages? Being able to track things that happen in the real world with what happened on the bill. As I said before, right-sizing some instances. These things can take a couple of mouse clicks and a couple of keystrokes to change what would normally take you a month or two to do in the data center. So you can change things almost on the fly. Right-sizing is the first thing to do. Before you start turning things off and on, check if things are idling. Look at the CPU usage, the cycle times. See if you can turn things down a little bit. Look at the types of rates they're using. Have you got things sitting in a fixed instance that are sitting there idle most of the time? Or have you got things that scale up and down a lot that you could move to a more flexible rate on? And some of these things will require some investment. You might want to bring in a specialist. You might want to ring-fence someone's time outside of their normal productive day job. You might need to write a mini business case to say, we think we could save $10,000 a month by taking half a day of this person's time a month. Those sort of things are a couple of paragraphs in a business case that'll get you the buy-in to take that next step on your journey. That next step looks like, and this is a really important one, driving a tag strategy. So what I mean by that is all cloud providers will let you tag each instance with a number of parameters: cost center, team name, project name, person's name if you like. And they let you, at a very fine level of granularity, report on where that spend is going. And then you need to drive some compliance to that strategy. If it's not tagged, it shouldn't exist. If it's not tagged, it might get turned off. Those sort of things might drive some people into putting in place the tags that you need. You should then be getting pretty good at identifying any anomalies and spikes or drops. And they can be good and bad. Why did suddenly our usage drop down in the middle of the day? Something must have gone down rather than our customers going away. Why did we have a big spike over the weekend? Understanding what's happened in that cloud cost model is really, really important to understand how you can rectify it or how you can plan for it. At this point, you should be able to create some metrics, some KPIs and some scorecards. What do we expect it to look like? What type of numbers are we aiming for? Are we looking to try and save 1%, 5% over the next couple of weeks? What would that look like? Who's responsible for it? Management of workloads. By this point, we should be able to look at an environment, whether it's a development environment or a production environment, and say, this workload needs to start to look like this. It's a fixed capacity. It always needs to be this big, or it's actually going to spin up and down, rather than at the individual instance size. And then start to think about what you would do in the next phase to move that workload, that cloud workload, to a different cost-optimized model. You should be looking at your cloud provider's rate card and seeing where you can move to get a better discount, what you can bundle together, what sort of volume you might have for your next negotiation. And the reporting, tracking and trending that you can send out to the rest of the business should be starting to mature as well. You should be quite familiar with how the cloud bill breaks down, who's accountable for it, and let the business understand what you're doing. The last two phases I've rolled together, this is sort of when you're in that walking to running phase. Ideally, and this one could be hard, is to create showback or even chargeback reports. Depending on your organization's culture, you might already have your IT costs distributed out into the business units' P&L accounts. And some industries may have that centralized, and they're very reluctant to do an internal charging model. But at the very least, showing that cost back and adding it into the cost of sale or the cost of transaction for that business unit is really key to getting that ownership of the cost. Your real-time decision-making should become more mature. You should be able to find and remove underutilized services or overutilized services on a daily basis. And at this point, you might be able to look around and go, who else in our industry is doing this? Are we good? Are we bad? Are we on point? Some third parties might be able to help you with this information on an anonymous basis, or you might be able to reach out to your network and see if people can share what they're doing in the cloud space to see how their costs are tracking against yours. Automation in the optimized phase is really key. This is where you should be comfortable automating, scheduling things to happen. Experiment in your development environments and in your test environments before you roll things into production. But seeing your costs and your usage scale up and down in sync is a really powerful thing to see, really valuable. At this point, you should be able to bundle together the cloud spend that you've got and start thinking about that negotiation with your cloud provider. As I said, there are reserved instances. You can generally save something like 40% by bulk buying capacity for the next 3 years. You be very careful about what you're buying. So without the information that you've learned through those previous cycles, you might be taking the wrong decision. You might be locking in capacity that you don't need, or you might be missing out on a good discount for capacity that you will always need. You're communicating out to the business. You'll be building buy-in for the next phases. You might be wanting to take this FinOps team and approach to another area of the business. Communication strategy at the exec level will be really key. You should be able at this point to define budgets and forecasts. You should have a good level of confidence of what the next quarter, even the next year will look like and set some targets. You should be ready to have those negotiations with your cloud provider. Your procurement finance team should be well versed in where that cost is coming from and what it's going to look like. And you should be ready to review your journey and see where you can take it next. So those are the key components of the framework. And I'll move on to some of the tools that are available. You can't do this without tools, but the tools alone won't help you or save you or get you to the end of the journey. There's a lot of information I could provide here on tools, so I'm just going to talk about them in broad categories. The first category is the cloud provider tools. The two main ones, Amazon CloudWatch and Azure Cost Management. There's lots available here from your cloud provider. They'll provide you dashboards and reports, data to extract. They can set spend budgets. You can enforce a spend budget. Be careful when you go and do these things. I've firsthand seen the impact of having your production workload stop in the middle of a busy day because the performance testers ran a bunch of performance tests the week before that spent most of the budget. So be careful around putting hard spend limits in place until you understand the workloads. But those tools are there to almost enforce that cloud spend if you want to go that far. The other set of tools available are from third parties, and these are there for specialized use cases. You might be in multiple clouds. You might have a hybrid cloud on-premise in your own private data center that spans workloads into the cloud, and you want to combine those costs together. Some of these will provide you with integration with Power BI, for example. The tool vendors will have a lot of features that are available to you. Some of them will have a cost associated with them, so be careful of that cost as well. I'm not making any recommendations here, but there's a wealth of information, and there'll be more third-party tools than I've listed here. And then the last set of tools, and there's one I wanted to show, that are emerging at the moment. One of my principal engineers alerted me to this tool called InfraCost, which is an extension to VS Code, and I'll show a screenshot of that. So what you're looking at here is infrastructure as code. You might have heard this term bandied about by the technical folk. What this means is you're defining your cloud infrastructure in a file. You're not in the Amazon console or the Azure console configuring instances. You're defining it in a piece of code that you can then version control. So your DevOps or your infrastructure engineer will be working with a file like this, and you can see they've got instances in there. This is where they'll put in tags. And what they're doing there, about halfway down, there's a line that says monthly cost $1,300. And that's for that M5.x 8x large instance. And as he's changed that from M5 8x to something else, or changed it to that, that's what the cost is. So you can live, in real time, look at what the cost of your infrastructure you're about to deploy is. So imagine the power of having your finance person sitting alongside you, giving you some guidance on whether that's going to triple the budget or that's going to save you a huge amount of money. You don't want to have people doing these sort of things in isolation of the cost or feel no accountability for the cost. And likewise, you wouldn't want to let your finance team loose on a tool like this to go and downsize things because they can add up the cost that they've saved. So tools like this are becoming more and more common. The tool vendors have probably gone into the space as well. This one's available as open source as part of a VS Code extension. So that's most of what I wanted to cover. I wanted to give you a few more places to find information. I'll mention again the FinOps Foundation. They have a wealth of information around this framework. They have some training available. The Azure and Amazon website also have a lot of information around managing cloud cost. And the third-party tool vendors also have big sections on FinOps and white papers and pieces of the same framework and some alternatives. And there's that link to the VS Code infrastructure. So some key takeaways to wrap up. First thing, this is a cultural shift that's necessary to effectively manage cloud cost. Your teams need to collaborate closely. They need to be meeting daily, weekly, and you need to drive for real-time data and decision-making. Bring that as far left as you can. If you can get live information and making live decisions around cost, all the better. Thank you for your time, and have a great FinOps journey.